So, last time we began this study called Faithful Citizen. A study that I found on a shelf and that I hope will be timely and meaningful. I did preview all of the lessons, read through the... I copied session 2. I'm not feeling bad about running copies of previously copyrighted material because the company that produced this, which was based in Inver Grove Heights, is out of business. And that's the way that it's going for a lot of small publishing companies. I used to buy a lot of stuff from a company in Lima, Ohio, and in fact sent them some stuff. I was going to have a collection of my Lenten series, Lenten sermons published. They offered me $25 for a Lenten series. I called a friend of mine at Oxford Publishing and said, What's the deal? I got 10 sermons here. They offered me $25. He said, well, that's about what we would have offered.
$2.50 a sermon.
Huh?
$2.50 a sermon.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
That's pretty low.
And you'd already paid me to preach them, so it was like, but anyway,
Pretty low hourly rate.
it was going to take like 9 months for the publishing process, and 4 months after I got the letter saying, we'll publish your sermons, we'll pay you $25, the company went out of business because the internet has so changed publishing. And I'm not saying that the sermons are good, but every week, I suppose Amy gets the same stuff we get here in the office. There are 2 sermons for free that are on the internet every Monday morning. I don't happen to think they're very good, but I don't look at them. Maybe he should, somebody's thinking. But
No,
anyway,
they weren't any good if you didn't look.
It has ruined the publishing business for small publishing companies. And so Logos Productions, which is the publisher of this material, no longer exists. And which is too bad because they did a lot of good stuff. Did any of you, so if you're not going to take those home and read them, I would like them back. Did any of you take one home last week and you'd like chapter 2 to insert into what you took home?
I took one home, but I didn't bring it back.
Okay.
Thank you. I did not take one home, and I don't have one right now. You left it. Thank you.
All right, so last week, to sort of get into this, we talked about a number of things. We talked about the characteristics of a faithful citizen. We talked about whether we considered ourselves conservative, liberal, or somewhere in the middle. And where did we see Jesus on that continuum? Right?
What was, since I only caught the tail end of last week, what was the consensus on Jesus, if there was one? Out of curiosity.
Anybody care to comment? What I recall is that we moved into, does it change with a certain kind of issue?
Mm-hmm.
mean, on the one hand, with Jesus in today's gospel text, taking a child, a person with no standing in that society, and saying, if you receive this child, you receive me, and you receive not only me, but the one who sent me, that's pretty liberal. Right? There's room for everybody. On the other hand, he says about the law, if you uncross a T or don't dot an I in the law, I don't want to be standing next to you in a lightning and thunderstorm. Okay? Because God intends what God intends. So about some things, very conservative. About some things, very liberal.
I think I'm going to be excused because I've got my hearing aids and I can't hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Sorry.
I am too.
Yep. So, we talked about that. We talked about on a similar continuum, individual rights. The Constitution speaks about individual rights, and it also speaks about the common good.
No, I want you to stay. I won't bother me at all.
Or the general welfare is the language used. And that spurred a little bit of conversation about who decides.
You didn't put the quotation marks.
I didn't put the quotation marks. If you see Dan Erickson, tell him that I didn't put the quotation marks. And then the last thing that we talked about is that folk song I was telling you we sang in second grade at Lone Elk Elementary School in Rockville, Maryland. And I think there was general disagreement with that in here. That this land is your land and this land is my land, from California to the New York Island. Why was there general disagreement with that? I think it was Phyllis, wasn't it?
It's not our land.
It's not our land.
Just here to take care of it.
This land is God's land. That's what we talked about. Right? And so I mentioned, and we did, at Gustavus Adolphus College this last week, and we talked about how in Genesis 1:26 to 28, God tells those created in His image, human beings made in God's image, to exercise dominion over all the earth. And we talked with the kids about the fact that to be created in God's image means we are to take care of God's world in a way that reflects God's care, because God is the source of the image, and that's what an image does. It reflects, right? No image stands alone. All right, so that's what we talked about last. Comments, questions, leftovers? Michelle?
The crossing the T's and dotting the I's and forgiveness, we're probably going to get at that more as we move forward, right? I mean...
I'm sure we will. I don't... Well,
that's sort of unfinished business. I'm not sure where the rest of the series is going, but that's something that's still open.
And I don't remember. I mean, I looked at it this summer. I'm trying to keep just ahead.
So.
Okay. All right. Then, for today, I'd like to look at question 2 at the end of chapter 1. I thought that might be a good place to start, because the other thing that is mentioned in chapter 1 of this course is the centrality, when we think about faithful citizens, of three words. What do we mean by covenant? What's a covenant?
The promise.
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 Could be an edict. I'm asking, like,
In fact, what Howard says, in the old, if you look at the Old Testament covenants, some are between equal parties, some are between unequal parties. And so, Luther makes quite a big deal about the fact that the Ten Commandments, which are a covenant, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. You shall, like Henry Mazinski reminded us, you shall remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. That's an edict. God says, I am the Lord your God. Luther makes a big deal of that what we call the Ten Commandments actually begins with a promise that precedes the law. Okay, gospel comes before law with the Ten Commandments. I'm the Lord your God, I've already brought you out of the land of Egypt. Not, if you keep the commandments, I will bring you out of Egypt. No, I've brought you out of Egypt. Here are the Ten Commandments, right? Covenant is a promise. It can be an edict between unequal parties. Anything else about covenant? When I meet with a couple about a wedding, we also talk about commitment. Promise, commitment, covenant, all right? Same sort of thing. Put something on the line, okay? How about community? What do we mean by community, or what do you associate with the word community?
The place where people live, basically. Or a gathering of people.
Really has a number of different meanings, doesn't it? Because when, at first you say place, then you say gathering, and we talk about a community here, but we don't live here, but we are a community. We gather here. The word congregation, a gathering of people. The word synagogue is a synonym for congregation or community, a gathering of people.
Tribe is a current.
Tribe. Which raises, for me at least, an issue. In order to be a community, how similar do we have to be? Right? And isn't that one of the issues I had a thought during church today. It was so profound I was going to write it down so I didn't forget it, and I can't remember. Oh, I know what it was. And it was about, so I'm sitting there thinking, I think Dwayne's reading the Old Testament lesson. And I think to I hope it was inspired. I think to myself, what we need today is the wisdom of Solomon. Now, with Solomon, here's why I thought that. the famous story with Solomon involves two women, right? Who've just given birth. And what's the issue?
They both want the child.
There's only one living child
Yeah.
and two women who have just given birth. And the one, I mean, they both claim the child. What does Solomon say?
Yep, cut it in half.
Cut baby in
Cut it in
half.
half.
And one mother says, I'll vote for that.
Yep.
And the other says,
No, spare the life.
she compromises. Right? She'd rather not have what she wants rather than have no result at all. And I thought, you know, when we talk about tribes, is the issue that we tend to gravitate toward people who are the same. Is that what a tribe is? Is that what you meant by tribe?
Not necessarily. I
Okay.
think it's used more broadly now. I think it's used to mean my people, and we may or may not be the same, but it's my gathering, my group, my community, tribe.
And because I was thinking, I mean, maybe we look alike, maybe we're the same gender,
Or the same ancestry, or...
same
That's the
ancestry,
origin.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
but maybe we're all conservative. Or maybe we understand conservative in exactly the same way.
Yeah.
My brother Jeff calls me one Saturday when he was still in pretty good shape. He says, "Guess where I am?" How should I know? Or first he says, "Guess what I'm doing?" How should I know? I'm eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Okay.
Good for you. Guess where I am?
At the kitchen table.
I'm sitting on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. What are you doing there? I'm applauding the congressman who I like, and I'm booing the ones that I don't like. He's a part of the, now I blanked again, of the Tea Party. He's a part of the Tea Party.
What?
Was.
Did Trump change his mind?
A tribe.
He does.
This is the brother that died 15 months ago, 16 months ago, so this was during Obama's administration. So when we went fishing, I said to him, this was during Bush's presidency. I said to him, you know what? You guys are as much a part of the problem as everybody else, because you don't listen to anybody.
How'd that go over?
Yeah.
Do you want to get out of the boat on land, or do you want to jump into Red Lake? Huh, Doug? Well,
Bob, it seems to me there's one more word
okay.
in community and that is church. Because we talk about the church as not the building, it's not the steeple, it's the people.
Uh-huh.
And so it seems like we use the word church to mean community
Right.
as well.
Do not teach your little girls, here is the church, here is the steeple.
Like,
Really? That's bad theology, isn't it?
We get desperate at dinner time, I'm sorry.
Here's the church, here's the people,
Yeah.
right?
And it's sure cute when they do that.
Yeah, if you want to teach us theology, come right on over.
Good for you.
Well, I could say been there, done that, but I did preach this morning, right? All right, then, so covenant, community, and common good. What's common good? Or, last week, general welfare in the congregation, in the Constitution. What does that mean?
What's for all?
You're right.
Good for most.
Or,
Good
No,
for most?
I'm not correcting, I'm wondering.
yeah.
How do that?
Uh-huh.
Justice for all?
When I was in college, in the political science, I forget what it's called, maybe it was an ethics course. Anyway, there was a guy named John Rawls. One of the founding fathers and mothers of our system of government is an Englishman named John Stuart Mills.
Mill.
And John Rawls is sort of in his camp, though he's 20th century. And here's what John Rawls said. The common good should be defined, this is in theory. If you took 100 people who knew nothing of their circumstance in life, and they made a constitution or a covenant that they could all live with, not knowing what their situation in life would be. Are they going to be smart or not smart, middle of the road, wealthy, not wealthy, male, female, you know, a completely blind test. That would be justice for all. Otherwise, justice for all is... You ever been on a jury?
Mm-hmm.
One of the great occasions, one of the great opportunities of my life. I was on a jury, 6 people in a civil case. A woman was suing an insurance company because they put a roof on her house and she swore it still leaked. She'd waited 3 years for this to go to trial. And we listened to testimony for 3 days. It was fascinating. I can't tell you how easy it was to listen to the back and forth format. And, you know, the attorney would ask a question and somebody would give an answer. I mean, it makes me think about sermons where somebody just talks as opposed to, you know, and the judge, Otis Godfrey, was fantastic. I mean, he had a little bit of a sense of humor, but it was obvious this was the most important thing in his day, this case. And we got to the jury room at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon with these instructions. You know, here are the issues for you to decide. Here are the questions you have to answer. And if you don't finish today by 8 o'clock tonight, you can come back Monday morning. And 2 things happened immediately when we got into the jury room. 1, we elected a foreman. And 2, somebody said, I'm not coming back Monday. So I don't care what happens, we're deciding this today. I thought, that's what justice looks like in the real world. I'm not coming back today. I mean, you know, on Monday. We're going to get this done. And we decided the case in a way that we all thought was very fair. We took it back into the courtroom. The judge read the verdict, and the first thing the plaintiff's lawyer said to her was, we can appeal this. And I thought, that is also what justice might look like in the very real world. Well, when we say justice for all, or what's good for everyone, or the common good, somebody I know quite well showed me this illustration the other day.
Is she sitting right over there?
And I asked, tell me what you think of the illustration, then I'll tell you if she is or not.
As someone who works with this illustration a lot, I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I will wait and see what others have to say.
So, when we say justice for all, some people who are faithful citizens mean equality, and some mean equity. What do you see when you look at this diagram, at this drawing?
See where equality is not the right word for that group.
Why not?
Because they all got the same, standing on the same box, but the little guy, he needs a bigger box.
Uh-huh.
So, they have an equal chance, but in reality, they don't because they're on the different sides of the border.
So Marv, for justice for all, you think should lean more toward what's called equity there,
Right.
more level playing field, or to increase, not everybody needs the same opportunity, but everybody should have what they need, what, to succeed, whatever succeed means, what? Michelle?
To survive, we have people that are having difficulty surviving.
Survive, okay,
In our country.
okay. So, okay, other thoughts about this? I was really struck by this. I've never thought about this before until this unnamed person brought this. I was gonna say home, but I can't say that. Brought this to my attention.
It's something that we never would really think about, but there it would, boom, it hits you right away.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Absolutely.
This is the first of many great ideas she's had. I mean, that this person has.
And it certainly wasn't mine, and there are many other ways of looking at this diagram. I mean, one thing is to say, why are these people on the outside, versus they're not even in the stadium?
That was what I was thinking. The first time I saw this, yeah, this makes so much sense. And then someone pointed out, well, why is the fence there in the first place?
Mhm.
Why are they stuck behind the fence? Wouldn't it be helpful if we could address the systemic problems that are preventing people from getting health care, preventing people from getting food, preventing people from getting over the fence? And then Michelle's point, why are they even in the stadium? Why don't they get a seat there?
Mhm.
Is the stadium not big enough? Is it, you know?
How about the fence?
Although
Baseball, you need to have a fence.
Well, and so, but that's an interesting, so why do we have the barriers or, you
But
know, the
in the
steps?
stadium and out of the stadium.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you
Otherwise, you're going a little spreader, right?
Yeah, you gotta have something to make
You have to
it
find a home run.
But so what are the, you know, what are the steps that we make a family go through to access food stamps? And are those steps important? I think a lot of people would say, yeah, those steps are really important to make sure that they actually have the need. So those, you know, those steps act as the fence, you know, to make sure that people are legitimately in need of what they have. So, I mean, it's a larger philosophical question of what barriers are in the way for people to get the things that they need? Why are those barriers there? Who put them there? Do we want them there? Do we not want them there? And I think they're the questions that we don't regularly ask ourselves as a society.
Mhm.
Who made these rules?
Mhm.
And
Another way to look at that too, Bob, is if they were on the inside of the fence, then they would be equal.
Yeah, they wouldn't need the boxes.
It's true. Yeah, exactly.
If they're inside the fence, there would be no question about equality or equity because
Well, is that so? Because, one year, we bought Timberwolves tickets, a season package of 10. And for $10 a seat, I could have touched the ceiling in that building. And then one night, when it was of another season, Katie's gonna take me to the Timberwolves Center for a game while she's home from college. And we're standing in line, I'm ready to buy two $10 tickets. And this lady comes up to us and says, would you like some tickets? Well, my mom and dad told me never to talk to strangers, so, you know, I said, no thanks. She said, no, I mean, these are good tickets. I said, well, we can't afford good tickets, we're buying $10 tickets. She says, they're free. The only thing is you have to sit next to my husband and me. We were gonna give these to somebody else. She said they're 15 rows from the court. Between where Tom Thibodeau yells at everybody and mid-court, but Tom Thibodeau wasn't a coach. So it was pleasant to be there. So we get to these seats. In order to get to these seats, we have to walk past where the Timberwolves are standing, getting ready to run on the court. We sit down in the seats, and Katie says to me, "Dad, these are seats where they have waitresses." I mean, we couldn't even see the $10 seats from where we were sitting. You know, so everybody inside is not equal.
Yeah.
Right? But
they had a choice to be equal.
so, but I mean, that just, well, I mean, when we start talking about this, how complex is it? And is this one of the things that divides the community into either smaller communities or tribes, and how much respect, not just tolerance, but how much respect is there for somebody like Myrna, who thinks they each got a box, for Pete's sakes, what more do we owe them? And somebody like Marv, who thinks, that one little guy needs more boxes, right? Can we have a conversation about that? Or are we so convinced that we are right? Or are we so convinced that what's mine is mine, and if you want something else, you spend your money, or I'll spend your money? You know?
Or
What does
are
it-
we so convinced that God wants it this way?
Uh-huh. Okay?
I don't know that God wants it that way.
Well, agreed. I mean, I agree. I think that's another, the evangelical movement will say, God has ordained this or that
Right,
or
right.
whatever. I shouldn't say evangelical, whatever.
All right. Doug, let's show the video, the DVD, whatever you call it. Now, this features a college president. He's the man on your right. And Robert Benny, Robert Bella, who I mentioned last time. He's the sociologist who studied American culture probably 30 years ago and wrote this huge work, Habits of the Heart. And they have a conversation. We want 1B on the thing.
On the DVD?
We watched 1A last time, and when I was previewing it upstairs, we had to use the clicker.
Do you know what it...
Well, if the menu comes up, then we're fine, then you just need to scroll down, otherwise fast forward through these talking heads. Oh, there, 1B, Global Society. Thanks, Doug.
We're talking in this series about Christians as faithful citizens, and let's get a little bit into the history of religion and politics in this United States of America. We have a very ambivalent relationship to governmental power, and especially to the notion of human freedom, which is sort of the big idea in American politics. Are we to be free from government, or free for government, as faithful citizens in this country?
Right. Well, I think you could even generalize that as to whether freedom is freedom from or freedom for. And certainly in our Christian heritage and in the colonial period, when the church was a very significant voice in public life, particularly in New England, freedom was understood as freedom for.
Yeah.
What it was freedom from was sin and corruption, in order that we should do the right thing. The notion that freedom meant freedom from all restraint, just everybody does whatever they want, was the last thing they thought freedom meant. So freedom, which is a word that trips from our tongues so easily as Americans, is one of the most ambivalent, ambiguous, complicated things in the world. And it cuts down very much on this question: are we free to do the right thing? Are we free from those things that almost force us to do the wrong thing?
Almost 400 years ago, the leader of the Massachusetts Bay Colony made a sermon on that very theme, aboard his ship, the Arbella.
Yes.
And that was the theme, freedom for. We are free for each other. We are in covenant with each other. And it was a socially responsible freedom. That's back there way a long time ago.
Yes.
My own sense is that Americans have made freedom synonymous with my individuality.
Yes, and it's a long and complicated story, but I'm afraid our Puritan ancestors are probably responsible for that too, insofar as they tended to argue that only the converted could really be members of the church. And that meant that it was your own personal experience of conversion that was key. Now, they saw that in a complex social setting in which the person would be nurtured so that they would have this experience. But once you make individual experience prior to community, then you are on a slippery slope, which can say, I'm all that counts, and society and so on are dispensable. Certainly that wasn't the case with the Puritans.
As a sociologist, you undoubtedly have great empirical evidence that it's not possible to be a human being only on one's own lonesome. In 1978, Gallup had a polling, and 80% of Americans agreed with the statement: an individual should arrive at their own religion beliefs independent of any church or synagogue.
Yes.
How would you evaluate that?
Well, of course, it's very indicative that many people thought that, but you have to ask the question, how the heck would they ever know about any church or synagogue if they were totally on their own without any social context? The notion, on the contrary, that everyone belongs to the church, which of course is another period in history, but nonetheless that we grow up within the church and become better Christians through the nurture of the church is a counterweight. Now that's a more Catholic idea. And the very notion of a parish, which means everybody who lives in a certain area belongs to that church. Well, we're beyond that historically and sociologically, but there's a certain truth in that that offsets this radical individualism that you come to your religious belief all by yourself. You sit alone in your room and decide out whether for yourself whether God exists or not. I have often, in the course of my career, been asked by students who, read Habits of the Heart and other things, what church should I belong to? And I will say to them, that's certainly not for me to tell you at all. That's up for you to find out. Were you raised in a church? Do you have any background to return to? And then the next question is, well, I really would like to belong to a church, but I don't believe in God. And I'd say, well, what do you mean by you don't believe in God? If you don't belong to the church and you don't understand what the people mean when they go through in their liturgy, they talk about God and through their life and their ethics and what they do in the world, how do you know what God means? Is that something you decide all by yourself, or is that something you learn by the experience of people for whom this term means a lot?
One of the words that you have contributed to the vocabulary of this discussion in America is Sheilaism. Now, who was Sheila in your book, Habits of the Heart? That's not her real name, but she represents something. Tell us about Sheila.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things in house that's been picked up and widely used. Sheila was really a very good person. She was a therapist, and she cared about other people. But in her religion, she said it was a belief in Sheila. And when she looked in the mirror, she saw God. And we drew from the conclusion of that if there were, I don't know, at that point, 250 million Americans, and I guess there's a lot more by now, there would be that many different religions, and that would be a little bit problematic. Now, Sheila was an extreme example of how you push. Now, I'm not saying that God is not within. Augustine said, God is within us. And the more profoundly you understand the deepest resources of your soul, the closer you'll get to God. That's an Orthodox too. But you still don't say, when I look in the mirror, I see God. That's pushing it in a different direction.
Well, furthermore, even aside from the religious question, our selfhood comes out of so many social relations, from the marriage of our parents to our birth to our being raised. I mean, we are walking results of numerous relationships to other people, and more than people. I mean, the natural environment, for example, every breath that we breathe is a relationship that we are deeply dependent on. Now, Americans seem to want to get away from that, especially in religion.
Well, in religion, but really in everything. And it's based on really a scientifically false understanding of selfhood. I think it is true in cognitive science, in neuroscience, in social psychology, and sociology, that we know that no one can become a human being in isolation. When you put a child in isolation, they will never learn to speak. Never learn to speak. They will not learn any kind of ethical standards. I mean, our self is a product of our interaction from day one with whoever was taking care of us when we came out of the womb. And that experience of nurture and care, because human infants cannot take care of themselves for a long, long time.
I'm told that when you isolate infants at birth, that if you keep them in the isolation ward long enough, they stop crying. Because nobody has responded to crying. It doesn't do any good.
Right. Well, you won't become a self unless you have deep interaction with other people.
One of my favorite anecdotes on that is a meeting in which a man stood up. He was a businessman. He said, "I want you all to know that I'm a self-made man."
Yes.
Somebody in the other part of the room said, "Brother, if you had to do it over again, wouldn't you ask for a little help?" Well, the fact is we all had help.
Yes, that's what we all had help. Without that, we wouldn't have survived infancy.
Oh, this individualism that we've talked a little bit about plays us false when we fail to somehow come up with the notion that sometimes it's not our fault what happens to us.
Yes.
Most Americans, when they lose a job, feel guilty.
Yes.
And they may know somehow in their rational mind it wasn't their fault, it's the economic system, etc. But one feels guilty that, you're unemployed.
Yes.
Now, what does the church have to say about that?
Well, there is a very important role for the church, because we do have a tendency to blame ourselves. I mean, people get in a car accident that wasn't, quote-unquote, their fault, but they still feel somehow, I should have done something different, because then if I had, this wouldn't have happened to me. Or they lose a child, and they think this is their fault. It is human nature to blame oneself. We know from poll data that Americans who are poor tend to accept the notion that it's their fault that they're poor. That if they had worked harder, if they stayed in school or whatever, they'd be better off. It's really their fault. The fact that they are the victims of structural problems doesn't change the fact that they blame themselves. And here I think the Christian teaching about the grace of God, and that Christ came to us to suffer with us, to experience what humans go through, right to the death, and we can bring at least some relief to that terrible, anguishing tendency to blame everything on oneself.
And somehow we in the church should be confronting each other with the affirmation, brother, it was not your fault. Sister, it wasn't your fault.
Exactly.
Yeah. We need to reassure people on
Yeah.
some of that.
Thanks, Doug. Thoughts? Really focusing on community, huh? That even though we have a sense that we are individuals, that we have individual rights, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that these are God-given rights. No person is an island, right? We are intended to be in relationship with other people. I mean, that's biblical. God makes human beings in God's image, male and female, for relationships. Thoughts, other thoughts, comments? Michelle?
I thought it was a good wasn't aware that Americans who are poor tend to blame themselves for this. I wasn't, that just didn't register for me. And then that to generalize that and say we have a tendency to blame ourselves for things, I wonder if that's the case, because I'm not feeling that in our society. Maybe from some, but I'm feeling like the more dominant narrative right now is, you know, I didn't do this, or not my fault, or...
I think it depends on who it is, and I think it depends on the power structure. I'm thinking a lot of victim sexual assault right now, and how internalized that is for many of us, saying, I must have done something wrong.
Yeah.
It must have been me. And I wonder if that's the case when you're on the receiving end of that power, whether it's sexual assault, whether it's poverty, whether it's
The right to
some sort of disease. Yeah, and you're thinking, oh, God, I must have done something. Maybe if I just worked harder, maybe if I would have changed something. You know, and I wonder so if you're on this end, you're thinking, it must be my fault. If you're on this end, I think that's where the dominant narrative is, like, I didn't do anything. You know?
Yeah, it's not my fault they didn't get colleges. You know.
Yeah. And so I think it depends, maybe, the answer to everything in the world, I think it depends. But I wonder if it depends on what relative power you have in a situation.
One way or the other, blame is certainly a very powerful, motive, function, experience? Force.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
On one of my sabbaticals, Michelle and I were in Estes Park, Colorado, and there was a very sharp professor of pastoral theology from Wartburg Seminary who was there. And he quoted a study from the 80s there were more people than ever bowling in the United States. And there were fewer people in bowling leagues in the United States than ever before. More individualism, less community. Bowling was telling a tale, very interesting. And that tendency, I suspect, has certainly increased. And this Sheilaism, in this Habits of the Heart that the guy with the narrower face, Bella, wrote, he interviewed any number of people, and Sheila basically, says when she looks in the mirror, she sees God's face, or she sees God, And that is, in her own way, a claim for individualism. And that's more and more the case in our world, in our culture. Which has implications for what it means to be a faithful citizen. What's the situation here where so many of us and our neighbors think about ourselves solely as individuals and do not appreciate the fact that we are created for? The reality is we are part of a community. And just now, one of my own observations I'll share. When I was a freshman in college, 1972, 1971, somewhere in there, I raced back to my dormitory one afternoon because I had pulled 365 birthdays out of a hat, and the first 100 were going to Vietnam. I was 113. And it wasn't long after that that the draft was eliminated. So that somebody didn't have to give 2 years to the service because there was a cost to being a part of a community, and we're all going to be volunteers now. You know? Or I think about what I understand was the case, and some of you know, what was it like when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and what was the mood of the country? My grandma, until the day she moved out of her house in her 90s, had 20 pounds of sugar stashed at the head of the steps on the second floor in case rationing came back. Okay? And when the Twin Towers and the Pentagon were destroyed, or that portion of the Pentagon, President Bush announced that we would not all have to sacrifice to fight the war on terror. I mean, different understandings about who we are, individuals, community, what? You know?
I was in the 7th grade about when that happened.
Huh?
I was in the 7th grade when that happened, 1941.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was. Nobody did.
Right.
Nobody knew what it was for Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do we...
It didn't matter, did it, Mark?
You can find out.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting what they had to say about the church on a scale of 1 to 10. Here you have, if you belong to the church, you must have had an individual experience like others in the church. Okay? Have you invited Jesus into your heart? What were the circumstances? Was your life a mess? Did you have a hole in your heart? And then you invited Jesus in and the hole was filled? That's the entrance into some churches. The contrast, or at the other end of the spectrum, is the mother church, or what they refer to as the parish church, Or in Germany and the Scandinavian countries, the definition of that would be the state church, where if you live here, you're a part of the church. Where's our understanding of the church? Between 1 and 10.
I think it's all individual again. What your parents are, that's where you're gonna be. And then you get a little older, you get away from the church, get married, have a child, something happens to that child, and what makes you wake up a little bit, you go back to church. And I said that when that happened to me, Lord, I'm not saying that I'm coming back because I want you to make my child better.
Yeah.
I just want to come back and do better.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So that some individual experiences and some are because of your parents or Lutheran or Catholic, and that's what you are.
Yep. You know, can I join this church? Do we ask, tell us about your experience? What are your bona fides? Or do we say, oh, we thought you were already a member? Or, absolutely, nothing to it.
Or if you want to be married here, you're going to have to join the church.
Right. That's a little different, as far as I'm concerned, that's a little different question.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with the scale. I'm not seeing us necessarily on that scale.
Aren't you? You want to say more about that?
Not really.
Not till 12:15.
You're right.
I think we're pretty close to, well...
Us as in Cross Lutheran Church?
I'm sorry?
Us as in Cross Lutheran
Yes.
Church? Okay.
Yes.
Meaning, you said state church, meaning that we...
Not a state church, but the mother church, that anyone can belong. We don't have a purity test.
Oh.
Well, also, like when you look at our former membership rolls, everybody lives within a half mile across.
Except those of us who live in Oakdale.
Well, yeah, but, when you go back, I'd say 30, 40 years.
How it started.
Yeah.
Was a neighborhood.
It's a neighborhood church,
Yeah.
and if you were Lutheran, this was where you went. Done.
Well, actually, it wasn't.
Okay.
I mean, it was a neighborhood, it is in a neighborhood, but it was Missouri Synod. And so there was a bit more of a purity test in those days. And that's why, there's also Our Redeemer on Larpenteur, Lakeview on County Road C, St. Mark's in North St. Paul.
House of Prayer.
House of Prayer in Oakdale. So we have moved away from that initial concern about being Missouri Synod. I mean, there's a litmus test to be Missouri Synod.
And what is that, Bob?
Well, you have to be a literalist when it comes to the Bible. You have to be very conservative theologically. You have to understand that the pastor rules the church, the congregation, and I don't know how it is anymore. I don't know how it is today, but when this church left the Missouri Synod, I don't know that women could vote. And
women pastors,
no
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
no female clergy.
Right.
So I mean, and when we used to go to Claire and Chuck's, just because your sister is your sister, she would say to the pastor, my sister and her husband are here, they're gonna take, but you have to check with the pastor in order to commune at in the Missouri Synod Church. Phyllis?
That's why, when I went to just a few years ago, I went to my granddaughter's first communion.
Yeah.
And they wanted me to talk to the pastor beforehand, and I thought, no. So I couldn't take communion with my granddaughter, and that really upset me, you know, so.
Yeah, we've gone back when my dad was still in his Missouri Synod Church.
Yeah.
We never talked to the pastor, but we weren't welcomed either, you know, to, for communion, that kind of thing.
Right.
Well, and Doug's dad told him I was going to seminary because he knew it would bother the pastor, and the pastor said, "That's no place for women." Right to Doug's dad, why did you know? That's no place for women.
When, I'll say two more things, then we gotta go.
Oh, yes.
When Corrine Rohrbach married Ken Johnson, Corrine's brother, who is a Missouri Synod pastor, and I shared the service here at my invitation. He broke Missouri Synod law participating in that service because it is their law that a Missouri Synod pastor cannot pray with people in another denomination.
Oh, my goodness.
So on, not September 11th, but let's say September 15th, 2001, when they filled Yankee Stadium for a prayer service, and they invited this Christian and that Christian, and a Muslim imam, and a Jewish rabbi, and a Buddhist whatever, and a Hindu whatever, the Missouri Synod pastors in New York City stayed home.
Can I ask, what's the rationale, like what's the gospel basis or the biblical basis for that? Because I'm missing the connection. And
Well, you're not asking a Missouri Synod pastor this question, right? But and this is a lecture for another day.
Fair enough.
You brought it up.
It has to do with their understanding of what it means to discern the body of Christ. And they believe if you don't discern in the bread the body of Christ, you're not welcome at the table. And the only reason, and to protect you from making that mistake, you're not welcome. Okay? And I think that all of the limitations around worship have to do with that.
Okay.
And the issue with that, according to this pastor and this pastor, is that when Paul, the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians, unless you discern the body when you come to the Lord's Supper, you're eating and drinking, you're eating or drinking to your damnation, or whatever he says. He's not talking about bread.
Mm-hmm.
We say he's talking about
the body.
The body. I mean, when I came here, my classmate Marilyn Breckenridge was on the Synod staff. She helped the call process here. She said to me, "I just have one word of advice for you, Bob. When you go there and you see everybody bowing, just remember they're not bowing at you." Well, why do some people bow? Well, I think it's because that's what they were taught. And I think it's because they are showing respect. And if they were Roman Catholic, they would be showing respect for the body of Christ, that is the remaining host from the last communion service. But I think here, people would say they're bowing at the altar to show respect, when really the body of Christ should be bowing it. We should all turn to the center and bow toward each other, because that's where the body of Christ is when we come into the sanctuary, right? For us, that's the body of Christ that matters, okay? So I think that's where it is, okay? So the last thing I'll say is, you know, with who belongs and who doesn't. Jesus told a parable about the wheat and the tares. The farmer goes out and he sows wheat in his field, and an enemy comes and sows weeds, tares, among the wheat. And what does Jesus say? Get out there and start weeding? No. He says, let the wheat and the weeds grow together, and the Lord will do the separating at the harvest. Okay? Don't worry about who belongs and who doesn't. That's not ours to worry about.
So how does that extend to us being a citizen?
Mm-hmm. Do you need a fence?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think about this a lot with, you know, I think a lot about, you know, government oversight of
Yep.
programs.
Yep.
Because that's
Yep.
what I do in my job, and
Right.
the work that a lot of legislatures around the nation right now are going to prevent fraud and to, you know, find the fraudulent, and it doesn't happen.
Right.
And at what point do we say we need to trust people that they actually need what they say they need?
Mhm.
Whether it's a government program, whether it's someone at the community market, whether it's someone at, you know, receiving a backpack at John Glenn. And I feel like we're missing that trust component.
Mhm.
All of us, me too, myself included, and I know you've mentioned it in your sermons too.
Because it's not personal enough, right? Because we don't know, I mean, the person behind the desk doesn't really know the person in front of the desk, right?
Or the voice on the phone,
Yeah,
Yeah,
calling for help.
yeah.
or online, I mean, and so how do we face that sort of situation?
How do you balance that not being taken advantage of and managing your resources wisely, and also that need?
Because some people, they're not even trying to look over the fence, they got their backs turned the other way. Do they need a box? I mean,
Yeah,
so we'll answer all of those questions next week in the first 20 minutes. Be sure and come. But, I mean, you know,
Well, you
You're
know,
right.
it's not